you see ADAMA, you see unbridled black excellence. Whether on the African continent, throughout the diaspora, or in your indigenous residence, it represents our unrivaled global presence. Whether prologue, present, or prescient, it's a tribute to the days of the troubadours and chevaliers, to the griots heaven sent, that raised protest and said none rest until we put down local and global unrest. To those who refuse to be reticent, to those who refuse to be silenced, it's a love letter to black love, it's a warning to white violence. It's years of tears, it's eons of joy. At ADAMA, you will see yourself, your elders, your peers, men and women, ladies and gentlemen, children, girls and boys. It's a place you can explore, digest, and enjoy in a minute or a week, in a year or an hour. And what makes it unique is that it's complete and completely ours. It's a seed that blossomed and bloomed into a beautiful rainflower. It's an acorn buried beneath a radiant rain shower that grew into a tree. That voice you hear in your ear on the breeze says, when you see ADAMA, you see our unbridled elegance, you see our undeniable presence, you see our joy, our pain, you see our struggle, our reign. When you see ADAMA, you see unbridled black excellence. Man, my car doesn't talk.
Yes. Check 1, 2. Good day, everybody. Good day. Hope everybody's doing well. Would like to welcome you once again to the ADAMA Arts Salon here from Pittsburgh Yards, where we have our home. Thank you all for being here. We're excited for today's conversation. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Fahamu Puku. I am the founder of ADAMA. And want to just, before we get into today's program, just make a couple of quick announcements. This is a busy week at ADAMA, and we hope to see you back for all of our events. Of course, we have our conversation today with Dr. Lia Bascomb and Jon Goode. But on Wednesday, we will also have a conversation on Wednesday evening with Alicia Knock, curator from the Centre Pompidou in Paris, as a part of a series called Black Paris Talks. So we hope you'll come back for that on Wednesday at 6 p.m. And on Friday, we'll be opening our next exhibition, Pieces of Us, featuring selections from the Dr. Damien and Kim Fisher collection. So we hope to see you back on Friday evening as well. Now, without any further ado, let's get our conversation started today. We are thrilled to have two of Atlanta's finest here with us today. Our moderator is Dr. Lia Bascomb. She's an associate professor in the Department of Africana Studies, as well as being affiliated with the Institute for Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Georgia State University. Her scholarly interests focus on representations and performances of nation, gender, and sexuality across the African diaspora. She has published in journals such as Meridians, Souls, Palimpsests, Anthurium, Antipode, and The Black Scholar. In her book, In Plenty and in Time of Need, Popular Culture and the Remapping of Barbadian Identity, is part of the Critical Caribbean Studies series at Rutgers University Press. Please give a hand for Dr. Lia Bascomb. All right, I should have said give 2 hands. Give 2 hands for, thank you. There you go, that's been a little better. And also we have Jon Goode, an Emmy-nominated writer whose work has been featured in CNN's Black in America, HBO's Def Poetry Jam, BET's Lyric Cafe, and TV1's Versus and Flow. He has also written radio commercials for McDonald's, print ads for Nike, and written and appeared in commercials, vignettes, and interstitials for MTV, Comedy Central, VH1, TV Land, Nick at Night, and much, much, much more. Jon's work earned him the 2006 Promax Gold for the best copyright in North America, and in 2022, he won a Gold American Advertising Award for Branded Content and Entertainment Non-Broadcast, a Silver Telly Award, and was again nominated for a Promax. All right, Jon, save some for the rest of us. Jon's collections of poems and short stories, Conduit, was #1 on Amazon for 16 weeks. Sound like a Whitney album. His debut novel, Midas, was #1 title on Amazon for 5 weeks, and his latest collection of short stories, Black Curio, has been #1 on Amazon since its release in September of 2024. Jon is a fellow of the Artist in Residency in Serenbe and host and storyteller with The Moth. We are thrilled to have them today in conversation. Look forward to diving in with you guys and enjoy.
Thank you, Dr. Peku, and thank you to everyone at ADAMA for having us today and for everybody in the room and watching online. Um, so I'm gonna just jump right in.
Do it.
And sorry if I forget y'all are here, but we talk all the time, so sorry. Um, so on top of, the already mentioned accolades, you started writing mainly in performance. In spoken word poetry, you have been on stages of every state of the 50 United States, in Italy, in UK, in Jamaica, abounds. You may have seen him in your schools, in your churches, in your coffee shops. What was the transition like for you going from writing for performance to writing on the page?
Oh, yes. So I was writing just strictly to go and perform at open mics in Atlanta. I started at the Yin Yang. Dr. Palmer Paku was there as Sex Chalk hosting the thing. It was a ride. And so Jessica Care Moore, the poet, she won the Apollo half a dozen or more times. She said, you should put out a book. And at that time, I was like, no one's buying books, they're just buying CDs. So we were just doing a bunch of CDs. And then finally, I sat down one day and I said, no, I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna put out a book. So I started looking at the poems and started realizing that some of these are strictly for the stage. They're not quite as good in print. And some of them can navigate both worlds. And so I grabbed the ones that could do both, and that became Conduit, that collection of poems and short stories. But also some of what was in my head, I was like, oh, these aren't poems. Like, these are stories. This is just prose. And so then I started really delving into expanding out of poetry into this idea of short stories. And yeah, and with Midas, it started as a poem. And then it became a short story. And I was 60 pages into the short story. And I was like, this story isn't that short. This story's going to be something else. And then I just let it evolve into what it was.
So this is book number 3 for y'all who haven't seen Black Curio. And so we know how the first 2 came about. What, if anything, feels different the third time around?
Well, the third time when I was collecting that that collection of stories, it started. I was on St. Simon's Island working on a project called 100 Miles, where they were collecting stories from the coast of Georgia. Theoretically, the coast of Georgia is 100 miles long. So they sent me down to the Okefenokee Swamp, which is terrifying. You know, it's me and God bless them, a bunch of white people in a swamp. I said, this doesn't feel good to my spirit. Everything in me says run north, but I stayed. So we were there in the Okefenokee, then we went to the Gullah Islands, and we were just up and down the coast. And we ended up in this city, Bologna, and I was interviewing a shrimp boat captain, or a lady. She had a shrimp boat. She converted it into a touring boat to tour the coast. And it's bare bones. Like, you got to really want to tour the coast. Like, it's not a lot of amenities. You know, actually you have to work on the boat. So when I was leaving the dock, I was walking up, and sitting on this ladder, staring at the water, was this ceramic figurine of a little black boy. It's just staring at the water. And I'm looking at it, it's looking at me, I'm looking at it, it's looking at me. And it's like no one else can acknowledge it or see it, though. And so then at first I thought, well, maybe these people see it so much, you know, you can see something so much it becomes invisible to you. But then I remembered there were people with me that have never been here, like, why can't they see it? And, you know, me and the figurine, we're the only 2 black people here. So I was like, oh, you know, what have you seen? What's your story? Why can't anyone see you but me? So I started writing the story of the figurine. It's a story in the book. It's called The Curio Case of Benson Stone. And so when I wrote that, that was really the anchor story that led me to explore the idea of bringing together a larger collection of stories. So where everything else, it seemed driven by these narratives that I already kind of had working in my head, this one absolutely, like, it just appeared almost in whole. Like, I looked at the curio, and I went back to the place I was staying on St. Simon's, and I wrote maybe 40 pages of it. I think it's only 50 or 60 pages in total, maybe, and I probably wrote 40 of it right there. Yeah.
So your first book is called Conduit, and you talk about how, as an artist, you are a conduit for the stories that need to be told. Yes. At the same time, you've done TV commercials, you've done poems for the stage, for the page, you've done not going to say ransom notes. You've done short stories, you've done essays, you've worked, essays on films. How, there's plays, you've done, was the 48-hour film festival. How do you decide which form to work in? Or does the story tell you how it needs to be told?
I mean, so when I'm working with, if I'm doing it on my own, then I just let it evolve into what it's going to be. Like I said with Midas, I thought it was going to be a poem. And I was like, no, this isn't a poem. Then I was like, oh, it'll be a short story. Oh, no, this isn't a short story. So I let the story kind of tell me what it was going to be. But of course, when I'm working with MTV or any of these people, like, what do you want? What do you need? What is it? And I'm going to give it to them. And often they'll look at me and they'll say, hey, Jon, you wrote this thing and we don't really want to, mess with your art. I'm like, my God, this is whatever you want it to be. Like, this is, what do you need this to be? Let's make it what you need. Like, the things I'm gonna do for myself, absolutely, I'm gonna craft them 100% to what I need them to be. But here, I'm here to deliver for you. So long as you don't ask me to do something that compromises my morals, what do you need? And then I just give them what they want and need.
And do you have a favorite form to work in?
A favorite form, I do not. My thing is, if it can be written, I feel like I can write it. So
That's
I'm
true.
like, what is it? What are we doing? So when the 48-hour film festival came around and they asked me, hey, we want you to come on our team and write this short film, they were like, have you written a short film? I said, of course I have. But that was inaccurate. It was inaccurate. Some would say untrue. But I wrote it and we won an award for this short film in the 48-hour film festival. And the same thing when the fantastic and wonderful Deba Newman was working at Viacom, and she said, hey, Jon, we like this poem you wrote for this project with Nick at Night. And what she said was, she was like, Jon, what do you do? What do you do? I said, I'm a writer. She said, oh, I thought you were a poet. I said, poetry is one of the things I can write, but I'm a writer. Because I learned early in that evolution, you can't paint yourself into too narrow of a box, or they'll just have you writing poems forever. So she's like, oh, okay, you're a writer. She said, have you ever written a TV commercial? I said, of course I have. What are you talking about? So there's this incredible thing called Google. I Googled how you write a TV commercial. I read it, and I wrote a bunch of spots for their Black History Month campaign and for when they launched A Different World and The Cosby Show on their air. And we got nominated for 2 Emmys, and we won the Pro Max for those spots. But to me, it all begins with, if you give me the opportunity, I'm gonna take it. Like, I'd rather take the shot and miss than not take the shot. So if it comes to me, I'm gonna try my hand. And fortunately, I've been very successful.
I want to talk about your characters, right?
Yes.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the work yet, a lot of the characters are imaginative. Some of them are not only quite real, they're based on real people, real stuff.
Yeah.
But especially in the first 2 books, and true of the third one too, you usually write from a very clear masculine space, right? And in the third book, there's 2 stories in particular where you're still writing from a clear masculine space, but you flip it so that basically they have to be Black women, right? They have to see what that's like, they have to feel it, they have to deal with that, right? What was the impetus for that switch? Do you see it as a switch? And you have one, Black Coffee, you have another one where it's really just, how do you experience the terror of mundane sexual harassment? Right? What was the impetus, and how did you kind of evolve character-wise, where you're still very much rooted in the same space, but doing something different with it?
Yes, so the one that you're speaking about is called You're Lovely. And when I wrote it and I sent it to you, you were like, your horror voice is getting really good. And I was like, oh, is it horror? And you were like, no, it's horror. I was like, oh, okay, I accept. So that one started, I was at the Kroger on Old Nat. I was coming out of the Kroger, and these 2 young ladies, they were coming out of the Kroger, and this guy, he comes sprinting out, and he gets in front of them, he stops these, and I thought he knew them, but he did not. He stops them and he says, why aren't y'all smiling? And I was like, oh, this is a nightmare. This is gonna go horribly awry. But they broke into big smiles. They were very accepting of this thing. But I thought to myself, in 85% of interactions, this is not going to go this way. So I decided to write a story where that interaction is flipped. But it's a horror because that interaction, it holds no threat because of the power dynamics between men and women. Men are not afraid to be stopped by a woman and her say, why aren't you smiling? They be like, girl, if you don't move, you know, and they don't feel no threat. They don't feel like you're going to do anything to them. So I wrote the character so that she was more frightening and intimidating, and she could put this fear into this guy. So that's where the story starts and why it's written that way. Yeah. But I was at the Moth one night. This is super random, but I was at the Moth one night. I'm hosting. This young lady came to the Moth, God bless her, and she was like, you know, I like the way you dress. We should go out. And I was like, thank you, but no. But I appreciate you asking. So when I left that night, she was standing by my car, waiting in the parking lot. And I thought to myself, if this was reversed, this would be a nightmare. But because I'm a guy, I was like, girl, get off my car. What's wrong with you? Like, it was no problem, because I'm like, the power dynamics are just wildly different. But I was like, but if you could find a way to switch it, it would be an interesting conversation for midnight.
And so Black Coffee is the other one I'm thinking of. And this one, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of rethinks the idea of Black girl magic in terms of an actual substance.
It does.
And it's a similar kind of theme to Yellow Lovely, but in a much more dangerous and consequential space of an office. How did that one come about?
That one comes about because when women are sexually assaulted, men have a lot of questions about, why didn't you say something earlier? Why didn't you fight back? There's a lot of questions they have. So that story began from the idea also of trying to switch the power dynamic a bit, to have a man be able to view this situation and feel himself in that situation, to then understand, like, it's not as cut and dry and as clean and as linear as you might imagine it to be. It is horrific, and people deal with it in different ways in their own time. And you don't know what you would do in the situation until you're in the situation. So it makes the guy explore the trauma of it to really, like, come to some different conclusions. I'm trying to tell you how it goes without giving the whole thing away. Well, yes. Cool.
So one of the main things that I like, especially about this book, some of the early ones too, but place is a character in these texts, right? That 89 bus down Old Nat.
89
and
down
I mean,
Old
Old
Nat,
Nat is always there.
I know it so well.
You've got Lake Lanier, which is very much central to the main story. Even if it's not saying anything, it's like the main thing doing all the things. Buttermilk Bottoms is in here, and especially kind of the erasure of place and what that means. How do you think about rooting your stories in a specific place, especially seeing as you're also always concerned with a worldview?
Yeah, so the worldview that I express is going to always come from, like, this place of blackness. So the reason that the 89 bus or the 189 that goes up and down Old National shows up in so many stories is, one, I'm on that bus a lot. But two, people in Atlanta, they talk about how they miss the old Atlanta. And I always just say, well, go down Old National Highway if you want the old Atlanta. And it might not be as romantic as you remember it to be. It's kind of the wild, wild west. But because the South Side doesn't get quite, especially the Old National part of the South Side, Garvey Road, Old Nat, they don't get quite the attention as maybe the rest of Atlanta. It's kind of left intact in a way. So I love to tell the stories of the diverse and complicated and interesting people that you will meet on the bus, that you will meet at the Kroger, that you would just meet up and down Old National Highway. Because up and down Old Nat, you're gonna meet everybody, you know, from CEOs. I say to anyone, you will meet people of high virtue or low vice all over Old National Highway. It is an actual representation of how complicated and diverse and, you know, the black experience is. And we are, as black people, like, we're not a monolith. And Old Nat gives you all of that all day. And it's one of the reasons I love it so much. I love Old Nat. Because you will find yourself in incredible highbrow conversations with people you'd be like, I didn't imagine I was gonna be in this conversation with you. And then people who you'll see and you'll be like, you know, you seem like some sort of, you know, elevated human being? You're like, and you're not. You're not at all. Like you just got the clothes. You ain't got none of the brain power, the thought, the rhetoric, none of it. So I love it. I love it so much. So that's Old Nat. I mean, Woodruff Park shows up. Woodruff Park, right here in the center of Atlanta, Georgia, is also an interesting conversation for a place that's kind of in the heart of the city. And the people who run the city, they love the idea of Woodruff Park. They love the idea of the people in Woodruff Park. They just don't want it to be those people. So they want people to play chess in the park, but they don't want it to be those people playing chess in the park. So it's like they like the idea of a thing, but not the reality of it. So that's why when I talk about Woodruff Park, sometimes it comes off like fantasy, like a magical, mystical place, like a place outside of time, because it feels that way sometimes when you're in it. It's a completely different world. If you ever find yourself in Woodruff Park, especially playing chess, if you're not a person that's homeless or kind of newly out of prison that finds your way and finds this community in the park, they refer to you as a completely different person. They call you a citizen. They'll be like, hey, you can't be out here robbing these citizens, because if you rob a citizen, then the police will come and it's a problem. But now we can rob each other and it's not a problem. Like it's a completely different, insulated in some ways, world and society if you're down in Woodruff.
And I want to take Woodruff Park a little bit more,
Yeah.
because as we already said, like your characters come from everywhere, but some of them are very, very specific. How do you think about what it's like to tell somebody else's story in a way that is both respectful to them, but also recognizing that it's not your story, but it is your story because you were there and you witnessed it, right? How do you treat the boundary, or is there one, in terms of using real stories and real people?
Yeah, the great thing about a lot of these places, especially the people who live in Woodruff want their story told, but they want it told by someone that they trust, because their stories have been taken and exploited and told in a way that they don't appreciate. That's not true and honest to who they are. The same thing, this one guy in the park, Lamore, he tells this story about this guy coming to the park and just taking pictures of all the people in the park playing chess, all this stuff. And he says some weeks later, he's like, I'm walking down Peachtree and there's a picture of me, huge, in a window. And in that room, there are people, there's music, and people are drinking champagne. They're having, I guess it's an art opening. He says, and I go to the door, and they tell me I can't come in. And I tell them, but this is a picture of me. And they were like, I feel you, but you can't come in here. And so now, if you're down in the park, when people show up with cameras, they're very, very adamant. You can't take my picture. And when the news cameras come, because there's a news story, they stand around and they either put up the middle finger or they'll pull their pants down so that you can't use the footage. They're like, no, you will not take pictures or footage of me. So then when I'm in the park, and you know, I've been there for years, I got a nickname, they call me Bowtie, I'm in there. So they'd be like, Bowtie, you a writer? I'd be like, yeah. They'd be like, man, like, tell our stories, let them know. So I'll write it, I'll bring it to them. Sometimes, I'll just read it to them, tell them, what the story is. They'll be like, that's it, that's how it is. Because the park, it's something. There's a story in the book about, there's a guy in the park. His name's Michael Jackson. That's his real name, Michael Jackson. There's also a Janet Jackson in the park, but that's not her real name. She thinks she's Janet Jackson. Also, if you meet Janet Jackson in the park, she can fight, just so that you know. She can fight.
Important information.
She's tough. She's nothing to play with. So one day we're in the park, it's late at night, and someone had gotten a cachet of the mini liquor bottles you get on the plane. So they were like empty bottles everywhere. Everyone was feeling good. So this guy looks at Michael Jackson. He says, I'm mad at you, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson said, why are you mad at me? He says, you know why I'm mad at you. He says, I promise you I don't. He said, last week you beat me up. He said, I didn't beat you up. I just knocked you out. To which another guy said, that's true. He didn't beat you up. He hit you once, he knocked you out, and he left you. That's not beating up. That's just knocked out. So the guy said, whatever you did, I'm mad at you. And Michael Jackson said, I told him, I said, this is beautiful. It's poetry. He said, look, man. He said, that ass whipping was on the road, minding his own business. And you stepped in front of it. And that's your fault. And I'm going to tell you now, there's another ass whipping on the road. Stay your ass on the curb. I said, that's poetry, Michael Jackson. That's poetry, if ever there was poetry. That's poetic. So I wrote a story version of it that actually shows up in the book. And I showed it to him. He was like, that's exactly how it went. I said, that's exactly how it went, brother. That's how it went. That's the story.
So I want to think about the characters of the places and together, right? And thinking about community, right?
Yes.
This is a thing that you are very big on. This is a thing that you move through, that you build, that you respect, right? When you're writing, especially when you're writing for the page in something that's collected and together, how do you envision your audience? Do you? And how do you see text like this as a community building endeavor?
So when I'm writing, my audience in my head is the people on the 89. If I write something that people on the 89 can't understand, then I wrote it wrong. Like, I'm trying to write eye level right there, not above them, not below them, just right there, eye level. Because when it comes to poetry and short stories, a lot of this literature, for them, they imagine that it's in some ivory tower that they cannot access. And so I'm like, no, I'm gonna put it right there. And so that's what I think about when I'm writing. That's the audience that I'm thinking about. And then, of course, people all over, they get their hands on it and they're like, I get it, I understand it, you know, I can digest it. So that's the audience. And when I write at that level, in a way that everyone can kind of read and digest and comprehend, then it just expands the community. They can connect with the work. So if you're not on the 89, you might still read it. And people have said, they were like, when I read it, I feel like I'm on the 89. And I'm like, fantastic, as you should. And so that's the audience that I think about. And what was your next question?
Just in terms of the community building aspect that you started.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when it comes to storytelling, that's always how communities have been built, around narratives, around stories, you know, from the time of the griots in Africa, from sitting around the campfire, from my dad in his lounge chair with a room full of people just talking trash. You know, it's all this incredibly expansive thing built on the telling of our stories. So with every book, I try to have some kind of event. We had one at Portrait Coffee Thursday. I think 40 people RSVP'd, 60 or 70 people showed up, and no one wanted to go home at the end because, you know, we just come out of you know, this madness with this election, and here's this place where there's music, there's good art, there's coffee, and people described it as networking the way networking should be done. Like, no one was there saying, you know, who are you and what can you do for me? It was literally like, you know, like, who are you, and you know, just tell me about yourself. And so many people connected and made connections. People, one girl, she was like, I found a prayer partner. I say, at my event? Fantastic, wow. That's incredible, I love that for you. So, you know, people in those spaces, you can find what it is you need. You can find what it is you're looking for, even if you don't know you're looking for it. And you can find in those rooms that when we gather, we have everything we need within our community. You know, sometimes we just don't know. Like, you can be speaking with someone, like earlier when I was like, Rhonda knows sports. You're like, what? Rhonda knows sports. Like, sometimes we just don't know, you know, what everyone has, what everyone's abilities are. And once you find out, you'll be like, oh, we could do it. We could do it with ourselves. And I just think that's information that we need to really, really lean into, especially now. I think I answered more than your question, but that's what's supposed to go.
That's how it's supposed to go, yeah. So your work has always been timely. I'm thinking about Soul Aiken. I'm thinking about, I remember you sent me a piece. It was right after the verdict in the Eric Garner came down, and I was like, I got to get off the phone because I need one more day of class left. I need to teach people that we matter, right? And you sent me a poem. In this moment, because we are in another one of those, no adjectives needed, just moment, right? I want to ask about the role of history in your work and the role of possibility, right? So pieces like Buttermilk Bottoms, I want to spend some time with a curious case of Benson Stone, but also pieces, there's a fable in here, right? There's Bowley, there's a lot of imagination, right? So how do you see the importance of creating new worlds, this imaginative thing, right? How can we like rethink what is possible, right? While also being very honest and still imaginative with the histories that do exist and telling the ones specifically that haven't been told so much.
Yeah, wow, what a question. All right, so Buttermilk Bottom is a neighborhood that used to be here in Atlanta when the Fourth Ward in the Great Fire, when the whole Fourth Ward burned to the ground. Where the Civic Center is now in Atlanta, Georgia, was a neighborhood called Buttermilk Bottom. And they called it Buttermilk Bottom because it was a makeshift neighborhood. They had no drainage, and when the water, when it would rain and the water would collect, you know, the water would go stale, and they said it smelled like buttermilk down there. So they called it Buttermilk Bottom. So I was approached with a project that was trying to reinvigorate downtown Atlanta, and they wanted to do these stories of Atlanta. So they were like, how about doing something about Buttermilk Bottom? Absolutely. But what I wanted to do was I know how they say it got its name, which is what I told you. But then with black people, you know, black people always be like, that's what they say. But let me tell you how it really happened. So I did one of those, like, all right, I'm gonna reimagine like a different way that this place gets its name other than that. And I rooted it in a character, a man named Buttermilk. And so he's kind of exists in the past, and I use that character to move from the past to the now to the future with the possibilities, or like the tragedy of what was and then the magic of what was possible, what could be created in there, what that means today and what it could mean tomorrow. So I like the idea of being able to project in the future. And some of this began, Walter Mosley has a book called Futureland. There's a collection of short stories, but they're all connected. I remember reading that probably in my 20s and just being like blown away, amazed by this book. So some of that is informed by what he did with that book. With the Curio Case of Benson Stone, when I was in Valona and I saw the figurine, it also made me think of Lake Lanier. And when I thought of Lake Lanier, I just thought of all of the what they call drowned towns all over the nation. These black cities that they flooded to make lakes, and you know, tried to erase these people, their history, their culture, their everything. So that kind of became the backdrop of the story. Not to give it away, but if you read the story, there's a bunch of street names in there. Every street name is the name of a drowned town in America in that story. So I wanted to use that like as this ever-present backdrop to tell this other, which people called horror narrative. They were like, it's horror. I say, is it horror? I don't know. It wasn't horrific. It just is what happens in America. So, so yeah, I love the idea of centering history in a narrative like that. And some people have told me, they read the story and they were like, oh, I went and looked up the street names, and oh, those street names are this thing. And I'm like, oh, I love that. You know, if you want a lot of these stories, if you want to, there's little names and words you may not know, and if you look them up, they usually all mean something. So if you want to do it, there's a deeper dive, but if you don't want to do it, you know, it's like The Matrix, right? It could just be a good action movie if you want it to be, but if you want to read into it, it could be a deeper film. But like my cousin Ira, he don't see none of that. He was like, the way she ran up that wall and kicked that man, incredible. Best movie I've ever seen. So it could be that. It could be that.
So I'm going to stick with Curio Case of Benson Stone, and I don't want to give it away. But there's a sense of crossroads in the text. And for the main characters, they have this literal crossroads where they have to decide, what is your next step going to be? Who are you going to be moving forward, right? How do you see storytelling in particular as an art form that helps people work through this? And I'm thinking of this, again, in our moment, but also we're in Georgia. We know what the laws around K through 12 look like and the fights around history are. How do you see imaginative storytelling as a way to kind of think about, okay, who do you want to be and who do we want to be?
Yeah, so for me, so much of science fiction becomes science fact. So many of the stories that I saw as a kid on like Star Trek and stuff that Ray Bradbury did and stuff that Orson Welles did, so much of that stuff either came to be or was informed by what had come. I mean, you know, the Twilight Zone is started because Rod Serling just wants to tell this story about Emmett Till, and he can't think of a way to like, they won't let him do it on TV, so he starts this series, The Twilight Zone, because he's trying to get kind of these interesting stories and histories onto television. So I think that within these creative narratives, within these things that they consider fiction, when you look into them, when you dive deep into many of them, they're telling you these interesting, deeper truths. I mean, if you read anything by Octavia Butler, you're like, oh, you're just predicting the future. You could just see what's coming, and then you look up and you're like, oh, it's here. I mean, if you read Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talent, you read any of those books, you're like, oh, my goodness, well, didn't you know? Didn't you know what was coming? So I think that for a lot of the writers, these narratives are their ideas of what's coming. And it is interesting to see how much of it comes true. Like, even as we delve into this AI, I keep thinking to myself, every science fiction movie you've ever seen has told you how this is going to end. So, all right, let's do it. Let's do it. But I think I know how this goes, but all right, let's see. Let's see.
So we're running out of time, I think. So can you give us a little hint of what you're working on next and what we should expect to see?
Yes. So before I started Black Curio, I was halfway through another novel that is centered on a chess park. It's centered in what would be Woodruff Park. And it's about a young man that's he's going through a very, very rough spot in his marriage. And in this time, he finds himself drawn to this park and drawn to these men and women in the park. And through the course of time, they're imparting this wisdom and this knowledge to him that is helping him really evaluate and look at his life in these interesting and curious and different ways. Because if you go to Woodruff Park, any of these parks, and you talk to the men and women in the park, extremely wise people. They have a lot of, earned information and earned wisdom, but kind of like jailhouse attorneys, like people who, the guys in jail, they become attorneys. They say they can get everyone out of prison but themselves, right? They can get everybody out of prison but themselves. The people in the park have the information that can help. They can help anyone get their life together but themselves. Like, they can't seem to dig themselves out of the hole, but they can tell you how to get out of the hole. So this is the experience that the main character, the protagonist of the novel is having. And it winds itself into some really, I think, curious and interesting places, because the magic of the park shows up, like actually shows up, where the park might seem like Narnia. Once the lights go down and the street lights come on, the park is different in the night than it is in the day. I feel like that doesn't give it away. I feel like that was all right.
So there's another novel that's been on and off for a while. Do you want to talk about Collis?
Oh, yes. So I wrote a play. I lived in New Haven, Connecticut for 3 years. It is brutally cold in New Haven, Connecticut. I tell every black person in New Haven, you don't have to live like this. But I was in New Haven for 3 years, and I was hired by a theater there to write a stage play. And the stage play was called Halas, it means stop in Arabic. And it deals with a young man that worked at a big box type store, and he's in the Army Reserves. And so a war breaks out, and he's taken to the conflict, where he has to do some really, really unfortunate things. And then, like that, once the thing ends, you're just back in the big box store. Like, there's no way to reconcile it. There's no psychologist, psychiatrist, no, mental health advocate to help you out. And just him navigating this as a black man, navigating what this means for him. And so I wrote this for them, but some of this is informed from my time when I used to be in the United States Marine Corps at one point. So some of this is also informed by just what I saw people in the military, especially reservists, deal with, where, like, yeah, one day, you just work at Kroger, and the next day you got a rifle and you're in the sand, and then the next day you're back at Kroger and they expect you to be okay, and you're not going to be okay. You're not going to be okay at work. You're not going to be okay at home. You're not going to be okay on the 89 bus. You're not going to be okay at all.
So I think we're at about 45 minutes. I wanted to open it up for questions.
Cool. Thank y'all for coming. I appreciate y'all.
Are there questions in the room or online? We have one over here.
Oh, there's a mic.
Hi. I have seen you do your poetry, of course. What inspired you to do poetry?
So, I was an accountant forever, for a long time. And one day, this wonderful lady named Veronica Robinson comes to me and says, "I'm going to this event at this place called the Yin Yang. They're going to be doing poetry. Would you like to go with me?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I could think of nothing I would like to do less than go hear poetry. That's not my desire for myself." So she said, if I catch you before you leave the building, will you go?" I said, "Yeah, if you can catch me, I'll go. But I also know I'm going to leave 15 minutes early, as is my ritual." So I'm leaving, and she's by the elevators, because I guess she knows I leave 15 minutes early too. So she takes me down to the Yin Yang. There's an event called Founders Night. I can remember it. I can see it like it just happened. On that stage was Johanna Sharif, Akil Thomas, Spinks, Dialectic, Star Pickens, Shauna Kent, Wanda Jean, Ty Freedom Ford, We Won the Renaissance, and Dialectic. I remember it like I have it memorized. And I sat there, and I knew that I had access to the same words and the same alphabet that these people did. But I had no idea how they were doing with those same tools I have, what they were doing. Like it seemed, my mind was blown by it. And I said to myself in the moment, I was like, I feel like if you go home and try really hard, there's a chance you might be able to do something like that. So I went home and I started writing this poem. And, early poetry is about like love and revolution. That's it. It doesn't have any, it's love and revolution. So this poem was about love and revolution. And I went to the Yin Yang, and I went the first night, and the host, I'm not gonna say who the host was, but the host, he might even be here, but the host, I signed the list and I don't go up. They don't put me up. So at the end of the night I go, I was like, "Hey, I signed the list. Y'all didn't call me." He said, "Oh yeah, come back next week. We'll see what we can do." So I come back the next week. I think I signed the first night like 15, and I signed like 10. And he was like, yeah. The next week I come back, I don't go up the whole night. I said, "Hey, so that's 2 weeks in a row." And he's like, yeah, come back. So I come back the third week. I go up late in the night, but it goes well. I get a standing ovation. And I'm like, "Oh, fantastic, okay." So then I write a new poem. I come back a few weeks later, I do that poem, and it goes horribly. It goes terrible. And the host, I'm not gonna say what the host is, he said, "We have never kicked anyone off the stage, but you have come as close as anyone has ever come." Because it was terrible. It was bad. I couldn't remember. I just kept stumbling over it and starting over, and then finally I just stopped. But that night, that Founders Night, was the night that gave me the impetus to even try, to even begin down the journey. And the first night went well, which was great. The second night went terrible, which was great because that humbled me. It keeps you from getting the big head. And then from that night forward, I was just really, really dialed into, looking at the world, looking at society, writing these things, memorizing them as deeply and as best as I could, and then putting them on stage in front of an audience of people to see what they would do. Cool. Yes.
Yes, thank you. My question was very similar to hers, so I'm pivoting to something else.
Okay.
I'm curious about when is your best time for writing, meaning, early in the day, at night, and how do you write? And then the other question is, do you carry a little pad and pen with you all day and like ideas pop and do you write them, or do you just put away all of that and only write at specific times and days? I'm just curious about the technicality.
What is your practice?
Yeah, so I write mostly early in the morning. So I'm up most mornings around 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I go to the gym, leave the gym, take a shower, and I go to a coffee house. And I'm usually at that coffee house for 5 or 6 hours just writing different things, whatever I'm working on. So that's typically what happens. But also, especially before the pandemic, I used to write super late at night sometimes. Like the Majestic was 24 hours, so I'd go to the Majestic, and I would sit there like 3 in the morning, and I'd write. And the Majestic was great because the most amazing characters would come through that door at 3 in the morning. Like there was this lady always wrapped in Christmas lights. They were blinking, always wrapped in them. And she's sitting at the bar like she's not blinking and just eating pancakes. And I'm like, this is incredible. This is amazing. You're going to be in something. I don't know what, but you're going to show up somehow. So that's typically like the hour. It's usually very early or very late. But I also have a notebook always, or just now we got these phones, you can just, do the thing. But yeah, when ideas pop, I usually, I write them down. If I wake up out of a dream with something, I'll write it down. The worst thing to do is not to write the one down out of the dream, because you're gonna forget it. And then you're like, I had this, it would have changed the world. But I forgot it, because I didn't write it down. That's the nightmare. Oh my God. So yeah, I keep something to jot down every little idea. And then when I'm writing, I realize that on some days, a lot of this is gonna be no good. Like, it's not gonna go anywhere. But even on those days, I might get a line or two out of there that's like something, that'll spark something, that'll become something. But I just, you just write. Like some guy, he was like, yeah, if I don't have a great idea, I don't write. I was like, well then, you might not ever write anything. I don't know. I just write constantly, and then ideas come out of the things sometimes. Sometimes I have an idea and I write it, but some days I'm just writing. And then a line will hit, I'm like, oh, that's it. That's great. That can be something. Pull that line out and make it into a whole separate thing. But I throw it all against the wall.
First of all, the guy that was hosting that poetry thing, he sounds kind of amazing. I'd like to learn more about him. In light of what's been happening this week, of course, with the election and all that jazz. I know a lot of people have been extremely upset and having panic attacks and anxieties at an all-time level. And I saw this video of Toni Morrison. She was talking about how, I don't know which moment she was responding to, but she was talking about the result of some election or political something or another, and being sort of arrested and not being able to write. And a friend of hers, reminding her, like, this is precisely when artists go to work, right? So I'm wondering if you have plans to write, based on what's happening in the, current social, cultural, political climate, if that's something of interest, or if you're more so writing away from those things as opposed to writing towards them.
Yeah, so I wrote something the day after and posted it on Instagram, just like the thought came to me, and I wrote out a piece and I posted it. And I'm just writing. I'm writing for myself, but I'm also writing, for the people. And I don't know. I think something like 8,000 or 9,000 people watched this thing, and they've shared it a few thousand times. And so many people have been like, "These are the words we just needed to hear in this moment." Because as much as I'm writing for people, I'm also just writing for myself. Like, this is some self-soothing as well. So usually when things happen, I usually have some thought that I'll jot down. And with social media now, you can share it like immediately. Like back, at the Yin Yang, you had to write it, and you had to wait a week, at least a week, and then you had to have the $5. A lot had to happen for you to share the poem. But now, yeah, you could take it straight to people. So, Nina Simone, yeah, she says it's the responsibility of the artist to reflect the times, and I wholeheartedly and thoroughly agree. And that's why, some of the art, art goes everywhere. Like there's art that speaks to the time, and then there's art that's like party music to make you feel good in these moments as well. I feel like some of the issue we have now is that with the people who control media, that they just give you the party music and not the art that speaks to the time part of it. So it's interesting to watch what happens with art in these times, and what gets pushed to the forefront and what gets kind of pushed back. Yeah. I don't know if that was part of the question. I just freestyling now. Oh yes, a question. Look at this.
This has been so fun, and I have a lot of questions, but I think I'll ask one about AI.
Yeah.
As a writer, do you use ChatGPT, or how do you use AI to your benefit and practice?
So for what I'm writing, I don't use it, right? Now, if you say, hey, John, we need a business plan, then yeah, I'm gonna fire it up. Yeah, if we need a business plan, AI, let's do it. But for all of my creative endeavors, I'm like, this technology is new. We've written everything before this existed. And so I just know that the story that exists, it's within me. And so I might sit there. I will sit at that coffee shop and agonize for hours over a paragraph. And then at some point, like, you know, an ancient, wise black person would whisper in my ear, the paragraph is right. And I'd be like, oh, okay, good, it's good. But, you know, and I'm sure someone like, you throw it in AI and they could tell you in 5 minutes. And I'd be like, you could, I guess, but for me, for my practice, I'm going to sit there and I'm just going to agonize over these words. But when it's done, I just know these are my words, these are my thoughts. This is not like an algorithm trying to approximate what I think. This is what I think. This is, you know, I'm proud of these words. I'm proud to have come up with these words and to have presented it to people. Not against anyone that does anything else. This is just how I do it. Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you still use paper and pen, or are you on type only?
It just depends. So I do have a notebook that I have in the jacket a lot of times. So when I'm on the train, on the bus, a lot of times I'm scribbling in this notebook. And it's because my phone is usually maybe playing some music or something. But no, I have a lot of handwritten things. Some of it is typed. Interestingly enough, when I'm writing for like corporate things, that's always typed. I don't know why. That's never handwritten. I'm always typing. It's typed. But when I'm working on my own stuff, yeah, some of it will be, some portion of it usually ends up written in hand because I'm somewhere and I just got a pen and paper and I got to get this idea down or get this line down or something arrives where I'm like, oh, you know, the main character is actually a villain. You know, I write this thing down to help me push the plot forward. So, yeah.
I wasn't sure. Do we have any online questions? I don't know who's looking at that.
I think it's just us.
Okay. So any last words for today?
I just think in this time, as I said earlier, community is the most important thing. I think that people find themselves often in a place where they're looking for the city or the government or someone to do something for them. And I've just been encouraging people more and more to lean into their community, their tribe, their people, lean into the fact that the story of us is always a story of resilience. The story of us is always a story of having what we need if we will just accept that, if we will just look to each other and share conversations and stories and resources. We are more than enough. So that is my final word. We are more than enough.
Thank you, Jon Goode, and thank you, Adama, and thank you for everybody joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Lia. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Ernest, for coming. This is a great conversation, and my caveat, I remember when, Jonathan, you shared with me Midas, that still stays in my spirit, the ending of that book.
Thank you.
Such a great book. So.
Thank you.
Thank you again, guys, for coming out. As always, we are grateful. As a reminder, as Fahamu mentioned earlier, our next exhibition will be, and our opening will be this Friday, the 15th at 6 p.m. It will be the exhibition of Damien and Kimberly's Fisher's work. We hope to see you out there as well, which will be amazing. Our next ADAMA Salon will be on the 24th, and it will feature Farah Emmanuel, an independent curator and artist, and art advisor for formerly serving as the director of the Black Art in America. And so that will be on November 24th. We look forward to seeing you as well. And as always, you know, these are free. We always welcome you guys to kind of tribute to us, continue to support us so we can keep this free. Visit us at ADAMA, ATL.org. So ADAMAATL.org. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.